In 2016, there were 193, now 492 farms in Canada. 5 years later, that number had dropped by nearly 4,000. This isn't a story about bad weather or bad luck. It's a story about paperwork, permits, and a system quietly squeezing out the people who feed us. Picture a ranch in the foothills of Alberta, cattle scattered across grass that turns gold in September. A truck parked at an angle in the yard, its bed still holding a coil of fencing wire from the morning's work. This is not a postcard. This is a business, and like every business, it runs on margins. But unlike most businesses, it also runs on inheritance, on knowledge passed down through generations who learned the land not from a manual but from walking it season after season, mistake after mistake. That kind of knowledge cannot be taught in a classroom in a single semester. It takes a lifetime, and often it takes several lifetimes stitched together, one family passing the reins to the next. For most of Canada's history, that succession was assumed. A rancher grew old, and a son or daughter, or increasingly today, a niece or a hired hand who became like family, stepped into the boots left behind. The herd continued. The grass kept growing. The name on the gate stayed the same. But something has shifted in the last decade, and it isn't subtle if you know where to look. Fewer of those gates are staying in the same hands. Fewer of those names are being passed down. And the reason isn't collapsing cattle prices or sudden drought, though both of those still happen. The reason, according to the people actually living this life, is regulation. Layer after layer of it, arriving faster than any single operation can absorb. Let's go back to where this really starts, because the story doesn't begin with a single new rule. It begins with an entire way of life that was built on independence, and how that independence has been chipped away, rule by rule, form by form, until what's left doesn't look like ranching used to look at all. Canada has always had a strange relationship with its own land. This is a country where the government, at the federal and provincial level combined, holds legal control over roughly 89% of the territory. Ranchers lease grazing rights on land they will never own outright. Their cattle graze across public land under permits that can be adjusted, restricted, or reviewed at the discretion of a bureaucracy hundreds of kilometers away in an office building, made by people who may never have set foot on that particular stretch of grass. For generations, this arrangement worked because the rules were simple, and because the people writing them understood that grazing operations don't run on 9-to-5 logic. Cattle don't wait for office hours. Calving doesn't pause for a form to be processed. But simple rules have a way of becoming complicated ones, and complicated ones have a way of multiplying. Think about what it actually takes to keep a herd healthy today compared to 20 years ago. It used to be that a rancher could walk into a local supply store, pick up a vaccine or a round of antibiotics, and treat a sick animal that same afternoon. That direct relationship between producer and product was part of what made ranching survivable on thin margins, because you didn't need to add a veterinary bill on top of every single treatment. Since December of 2018, that changed nationally. Federal rules reclassified how medically important antibiotics could be sold, and retailers across the country, including major suppliers in Alberta, dramatically pulled back on over-the-counter sales of vaccines, nutritional treatments, and antibiotics that ranchers had relied on for decades. In their place came a new requirement. Producers now need to establish something called a veterinary client-patient relationship before they can even access many of these products. On paper, that sounds reasonable. Nobody's arguing that animal health oversight is a bad idea in principle, but on a ranch that spans thousands of acres, with cattle spread across leased crown land far from any town, that relationship requirement translates into recurring farm visits, mileage charges, consultation fees, and delays that didn't exist before. A sick animal that once got treated within hours might now wait for a scheduled visit. A cost that used to be the price of a bottle of medicine is now the price of that bottle plus a professional service fee, multiplied across every single incident, every single year. For a large-scale operation with deep pockets, this is an inconvenience. For a small family outfit running a few hundred head with 2 or 3 people doing all the work, it is a slow bleed on already thin margins. And that was just the beginning. In the years since, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency proposed a fresh round of amendments, this time targeting Part 15 of the Health of Animals regulations. The goal was to expand traceability requirements for how cattle move across the country, tracking every transfer of ownership and location with more granularity than ever before. The intention behind traceability isn't sinister. Disease outbreaks move fast in livestock, and knowing where an animal has been can be the difference between containing an outbreak in one region and watching it spread across provinces. Nobody in the ranching community disputes that traceability matters. What they dispute is the execution and the cost. The proposed changes would have required extensive new reporting for cattle movement, an enormous burden for operations that don't run like feedlots with animals confined to a single, easily monitored location. Extensive grazing on crown land means cattle move across vast, often remote stretches of terrain, sometimes crossing informal boundaries that don't map cleanly onto administrative reporting requirements. Industry groups pushed back hard. They pointed to estimates running into the tens of millions of dollars in annual compliance costs across the sector. They pointed out that the consultation process leading up to the proposal hadn't adequately captured the reality of extensive grazing operations, the kind that dominate the foothills and the prairies, as opposed to smaller, contained operations closer to urban centers. The pressure worked, at least for now. In January of 2026, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency paused the proposed changes indefinitely. That pause should be good news, and in a narrow sense it is, but pay attention to what a pause actually means in this context. It doesn't mean the pressure disappears. It doesn't mean the underlying trajectory reverses. It means the same proposal, or something close to it, remains on the table, waiting for a moment when it can be reintroduced with less resistance, or perhaps reintroduced piece by piece, so that no single announcement triggers the kind of unified pushback that stopped it this time. For ranchers who have lived through round after round of new compliance requirements, a pause doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a held breath. And you can only hold your breath so long before you have to make a decision about whether staying in this business is worth it at all. Until yesterday. Yesterday, the intensity of that persistent emission increased by 43%. Not gradually over days or weeks, not slowly ramping up over time. Suddenly, in the span of less than an hour. The signal went from one level to another level with no warning and no clear mechanism to explain the change. And then roughly 12 hours later, Voyager 1 registered the trajectory change and sent back the repeating signal. The timing cannot be coincidence. The JPL team knows this. They have looked at the probability. They have run the statistical analysis. The chance that these two events are unrelated is so small as to be effectively zero. Something caused the emission to increase. That same something, or something responding to that increase, caused Voyager 1 to change trajectory and send a signal back to Earth. The cause and effect are linked. The events are connected. And that connection is what terrifies the JPL team more than any individual discovery could. The team at JPL has formed a theory, and it is a theory that they are very carefully not sharing with the public because of how it sounds. But the internal communications, the ones that have started to leak to people connected to the space community, suggest that they believe Voyager 1 may have passed through or encountered some kind of structure. Not a solid object, not a spacecraft or a satellite or anything we would traditionally recognize as an artificial construct, but a structure nonetheless, something that has physical properties, something that occupies space, something that can interact with charged particles and magnetic fields in ways that current physics models have not accounted for. The persistent emission, according to the theory, is the signature of this structure. And Voyager 1 did not simply detect it from a distance. Voyager 1 may have actually collided with it, or passed through it, or made contact with it in some way that caused the trajectory change, and triggered the emission of the repeating signal. The contact was not violent. There was no impact that damaged the spacecraft. But it was real, it was physical, it was measurable, and it changed Voyager 1 in ways that we are only beginning to understand. Now stop for a moment and think about what that means. If something exists in interstellar space, something with enough physical presence to alter the trajectory of a spacecraft traveling at 38,000 miles per hour, that something is not a diffuse cloud of gas or plasma. It is not a thin medium that can be passed through without effect. It is substantial. It is real. It occupies actual physical space. And we have no model for what it could be. One possibility that some researchers are privately discussing is that this could be some kind of naturally occurring phenomenon that we simply have not encountered before, because Voyager 1 is the first and only human-made object to ever venture this far into interstellar space. Perhaps there are structures that form in the gaps between star systems, something built from the interaction of magnetic fields and plasma over millions of years, something that has a kind of physical solidity that we have never detected before, because we have never had an instrument out there to detect it. These structures might be natural formations, analogous to auroras or magnetic storms, but on a scale and with properties that our current models simply have not anticipated or accounted for. Another possibility, and one that people are even more reluctant to discuss publicly, is that this could be something artificial. Not necessarily alien, not necessarily intelligent, but manufactured, built, constructed by something with the capability to create structures that persist in interstellar space for vast periods of time. The reason this possibility is being discussed at all, the reason that people who study this data are not immediately dismissing it, is because of something that happened on the same day that Voyager 1 detected the structure. At the exact moment that the trajectory change occurred, the Voyager 1 spacecraft's communication system underwent a spontaneous recalibration. The frequency at which it broadcasts back to Earth shifted slightly, approximately 0.0001%. It is the kind of shift that could happen as a result of a physical impact. the kind of thing that might occur if Voyager 1 had collided with something at high velocity. But here is what makes it strange beyond measure. Immediately after that frequency shift, Voyager 1 adjusted itself back to the correct frequency, not by command from Earth, not because someone at JPL sent an instruction through the communication system. The spacecraft did it automatically. It performed a self-correction, which means that either Voyager 1 has some kind of autonomous response system that they have not publicly acknowledged, or something else corrected it, something that understood what the correct frequency should be, something that knew that Voyager 1 needed to be able to communicate with Earth. The more the JPL team analyzes the data, the more they are forced to confront a conclusion that seems impossible by every standard of rational scientific thought. Voyager 1 may have encountered something that is not just passive. It may have encountered something that is interactive, something that can respond to stimuli, something that can affect physical systems around it, something that might even be trying to communicate in a way that we can understand. The repeating signal that Voyager 1 detected is not a random noise. It has structure. It has a pattern. It contains information. It is clearly not a product of natural electromagnetic phenomena. When the JPL team ran it through various analysis protocols, looking for patterns that might reveal meaning or information content, they discovered something that stopped them in their tracks. The signal, when converted from audio frequency to data sequences, contains a mathematical pattern, not a sequence that appears in nature, not a sequence generated by random chance, a sequence that could only be generated by something with an understanding of mathematics. The Fibonacci sequence, starting with 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and continuing perfectly, followed immediately by the prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, followed by what appears to be a simplified representation of the hydrogen atom, 3 sequences that appear in human mathematics and physics, 3 sequences that form the foundation of how we understand the universe, 3 sequences that a civilization millions of years old would recognize and understand, generated by something in interstellar space, detected by a 50-year-old spacecraft, transmitted across 15 billion miles to a control room in Pasadena. Now you can begin to understand why the JPL team has not released an official statement. You can begin to understand why they are being careful about what they say publicly. Because if they release this information, if they tell the world that Voyager 1 may have encountered something that is interactive, that is trying to communicate, that understands mathematics and physics, the implications are staggering. The implications are world-changing. The implications are the kind of thing that would fundamentally alter how humanity sees itself in the universe and our place within it. Governments would convene emergency sessions. Stock markets would plummet. Religions would fracture and splinter. The social order would be questioned. The very meaning of human existence would come into question. And they cannot afford to get this wrong. They cannot afford to announce contact with an alien intelligence if they are not absolutely certain. But here is what they are also thinking, what the internal conversations are focusing on. If this is real, if Voyager 1 truly has encountered something, then the question becomes not just what is it, but what does it want? Why is it trying to communicate with us after all these years? Why did it allow Voyager 1 to escape unharmed? Why did it correct the communication frequency so that Voyager 1 could transmit what it had discovered back to its creators? And perhaps most importantly, was Voyager 1 the first time this thing encountered a human spacecraft? Or has it been watching us, waiting, prepared for contact, all along? The golden record that Voyager 1 carries, the copper disc coated in gold that contains greetings in 55 languages, music from human civilization, images of human beings, and a map showing Earth's location in the galaxy, suddenly takes on a new significance. That record was meant to be a message to anyone who might find Voyager 1 millions of years in the future. A message cast into the cosmic ocean as Carl Sagan described it. A message from one intelligent species to another species that might exist at some distant point in time. But what if something found it sooner? What if something found Voyager 1, not at the end of time, but right now, in the present moment, while the people who built it are still alive to receive a response? What if something out there in the darkness, between stars, is listening to our music, reading our greetings, seeing our faces, understanding our position in the galaxy, and making a decision about whether or not to respond or whether or not to acknowledge our existence? The team at JPL is moving carefully. They are continuing to analyze the data. They are working on potential responses to the signal. They are preparing for the possibility that Voyager 1 might receive another transmission. They are consulting with physicists and mathematicians and linguists about how to respond in kind. They are working on what they might say if contact is confirmed, if this is verified, if we are forced to admit that humanity is not alone and never has been. The silence from NASA is not the silence of ignorance. It is not the silence of denial. It is the silence of an organization that has stumbled upon something so profound, so fundamental, so world-altering, that they need time to understand it before they tell the world. Time to verify it. Time to prepare for the consequences. But time may not be something they have. Because if something out there is trying to communicate with us, if something has the technology to affect Voyager 1's trajectory and the intelligence to send mathematical sequences across the void, then it will not wait patiently for us to figure out what to do. It will communicate again. It will send another signal. It will demand a response. It will escalate its attempts to make contact. And when that happens, when the next signal comes, the world will know. We will know that we are not alone. We will know that something out there, something real, something intelligent, something with the capability to reach across the vast gulf between stars, knows that we are here, knows that we are listening, knows that we are trying to understand. And the question that will define the future of human civilization will no longer be theoretical. It will no longer be something discussed in philosophy classes or considered in late-night conversations. It will be immediate. It will be urgent. It will be now, right now. Voyager 1, the little spacecraft that was supposed to die in the early 1980s, that has already exceeded every expectation, that has already expanded the boundaries of human knowledge in ways we are still coming to terms with, may have just opened a door that we can never close again. A door between worlds, a door between species, a door between the known universe and something entirely unknown. Right now, somewhere in a control room in Pasadena, engineers are staring at their screens and thinking about that door. They are thinking about what lies on the other side. They are thinking about what comes next. They are thinking about what happens when the next signal arrives. They are listening. They are watching. They are waiting. They are prepared. Because 5 minutes ago, Voyager 1 turned around and made a discovery we cannot yet explain. But we will. Soon. We will. And nothing will ever be the same. And when a ranch sells, it rarely stays a ranch in the way it once was. Sometimes it gets absorbed into a larger operation, its identity folded into a corporate ledger somewhere. Sometimes it gets purchased by an investor with no intention of ranching it at all, held instead as a long-term asset. The cattle gone, the fences slowly falling into disrepair because nobody is walking them anymore. Either way, something is lost that goes beyond the economic value of the property. A rural school loses a family whose kids filled its classrooms. A feed store loses a customer who helped keep it open. A community hall loses volunteers who organized the events that held the town together. Ranching was never just an economic activity in these places. It was the connective tissue of entire communities. And when enough ranches disappear, those communities don't simply shrink. They can unravel entirely, leaving behind empty storefronts and half-full school gymnasiums that used to host packed fundraisers every autumn. This is why the conversation about regulation and land access isn't really a niche agricultural policy debate confined to farm publications. It's a conversation about what kind of rural Canada will still exist a generation from now, and what kind of food system the country will depend on. Every family ranch that disappears represents one fewer independent voice in an industry that risks becoming dominated by a small number of very large operations with the scale to absorb whatever compliance costs come next. Concentration of that kind tends to reduce resilience across the whole system. A disease outbreak, a market shock, a bad season, any of these hits harder when the industry has fewer, larger players rather than many smaller ones spread across different regions and risk profiles. Diversity in agriculture is a form of insurance against exactly the kinds of shocks that regulation is supposed to prevent, which makes it a strange irony that the regulatory response may be accelerating the very consolidation that makes the whole system more fragile. None of this means every regulation is wrong or that oversight itself is the enemy. Animal health rules exist because disease outbreaks in livestock can devastate not just individual farms, but entire regional economies and public health. Traceability systems exist because when something does go wrong, being able to trace an animal's movement quickly can mean the difference between a contained incident and a national crisis. Supply management exists because unregulated commodity markets have, historically, produced brutal boom and bust cycles that destroyed farming families just as surely as any current pressure does. The people who built these systems weren't trying to hurt family farms. They were often trying to protect them from different threats that were very real in their own time. But good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes, especially when rules designed for one era get layered on top of each other over decades, without anyone stepping back to ask what the cumulative weight of all of it actually looks like on the ground, on a real operation, run by a real family with real thin margins, and real limits on how much administrative burden a 2 or 3-person team can absorb while still doing the physical work of actually raising animals and managing land. Each individual rule might make sense in isolation. Stacked together over years, they start to resemble something closer to a wall, one that only the largest, best capitalized operations can climb over. So what happens next? The 2026 Census of Agriculture is currently underway, collection having begun this past May, and its results, expected later this year, will offer the clearest picture yet of whether the trend of the last decade is continuing, accelerating, or perhaps against expectations, beginning to slow. Every 5 years, this census has told the same basic story. Fewer farms, larger average size, older operators, rising land values. The open question is whether 2026 will finally show a different pattern, or whether it will simply confirm what so many people already living. This reality already know in their bones long before any spreadsheet catches up to it. For now, the ranchers still standing keep doing what ranchers have always done. They get up before sunrise, they check fences that don't care about federal regulations, they calve in the cold because calves don't wait for convenient weather or convenient policy timelines. They absorb whatever new cost or new form comes their way this year, and they try to figure out whether next year's costs will be the ones that finally make the math stop working. Some will make it, some quietly, without headlines, without announcements, will not. And when the next census numbers come out, showing yet another decline in the total count of farms across this country, it won't be a mystery. It will simply be the sum of thousands of individual decisions, made under thousands of individual kitchen tables, by families doing the only math that has ever mattered to them. Can we keep going, or is it finally time to sell? That's the quiet crisis playing out across rural Canada right now. Not a single dramatic event, not one policy you can point to and say, there, that's the villain. Instead, a slow accumulation, one veterinary visit fee at a time, one traceability form at a time, one quota price hike at a time, one speculative land purchase at a time, until an entire way of life that once defined vast stretches of this country finds itself standing on ground that keeps getting narrower beneath its feet. The land is still there, the grass still grows, the cattle still graze under the same wide sky that has watched over this work for more than a century. What's disappearing isn't the landscape, it's the families who have always been the ones tending it. And once that knowledge, that inheritance, that generational thread breaks, it doesn't come back easily, no matter how many programs or subsidies try to replace what was lost. The question this country has to answer, sooner rather than later, is whether it wants to keep asking that question every 5 years when the next census comes out, or whether it's finally ready to look honestly at what's actually causing the answer to keep getting worse.